Once upon a time, in the dense, lush forests of a land known as Andara in the heart of Nigeria, there lived a young hunter named David. David was known throughout his village for his unmatched skills with the bow and arrow. His sharp eyes that could spot a hare in the underbrush from a mile away, and his bravery that knew no bounds. His father, Samuel, was the greatest hunter Andara had ever known, and David had inherited both his skills and his sense of duty to protect his village. Andara was a peaceful place, blessed with fertile lands and abundant wildlife. The people of Andara lived in harmony with nature, respecting the animals and the spirits of the forest. But the peace of Andara was fragile, for the village was surrounded by a mysterious forest where strange things were said to happen. The villagers believed that the forest was home to powerful spirits and invisible beasts that could only be seen by those who were pure of heart. The elders of Andara often told stories of these invisible beasts, warning the young ones never to venture too far into the forest. But as is often the case with youth, curiosity got the better of David. He had heard the stories all his life, and as a skilled hunter, he was confident that he could face any danger the forest might hold. David's story began on a cool morning, just after the harmattan winds had blown through the village, leaving a thin layer of dust on everything. The forest was unusually quiet that morning, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. David had set out early, his bow slung over his shoulder, and a quiver full of arrows at his side. He was on a mission to bring back meat for the village, but in his heart, he hoped to catch a glimpse of the mysterious beasts the elders spoke of. David walked silently through the forest, his senses alert. The birds were not singing, and the usual rustle of small animals in the underbrush was absent. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. David's keen eyes scanned the trees and bushes, but there was no sign of life. The silence was unnerving, but David pressed on, determined to return with a successful hunt. As he ventured deeper into the forest, he noticed that the trees were growing closer together, their branches intertwining to form a thick canopy overhead. The sunlight barely penetrated the dense foliage, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. The air grew cooler, and a strange mist began to swirl around David's feet. He had never been this deep into the forest before, but his curiosity drove him forward. Suddenly, David heard a soft rustling sound behind him. He spun around, his bow at the ready, but there was nothing there. The mist grew thicker, and the rustling sound came again, this time from his left. David's heart began to race, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had faced wild animals before, and he knew how to keep his fear in check. Then, out of the corner of his eye, David saw something move in the mist. It was just a flicker of movement, almost too fast to see, but it was enough to make him realize that he was not alone. He nocked an arrow and waited, his eyes scanning the mist for any sign of the creature. The rustling sound grew louder, and the mist seemed to thicken around him. David strained his eyes, trying to see through the haze, but all he could make out were shifting shadows. He began to doubt himself. Perhaps the elders were right. Perhaps there were invisible beasts in this forest, and he was about to face them. Suddenly, the mist parted, and David found himself face to face with a large, shadowy figure. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen. It had the shape of a large cat, with sleek, muscular limbs and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the mist. But as David looked closer, he realized that the creature was not solid. It was made entirely of shadows and light, its form constantly shifting and changing. David's heart pounded in his chest, but he did not lower his bow. He knew that he was facing one of the invisible beasts the elders had warned about, and he had no idea how to fight it. The creature stared at him with its glowing eyes, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, without warning, the creature lunged at him. David reacted instinctively, releasing his arrow. The arrow flew straight through the creature, as if it were made of air, and embedded itself in a tree behind it. The creature let out a low growl, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the forest, and disappeared into the mist. David stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind racing. He had faced wild animals before, but this was something entirely different. He knew he had to return to the village and tell the elders what he had seen, but part of him was determined to learn more about these mysterious creatures. David returned to the village that evening, his mind still reeling from his encounter in the forest. He went straight to his father, Samuel, who was sitting by the fire outside their hut, sharpening his hunting knife. Samuel looked up as David approached, noticing the troubled expression on his son's face. "What troubles you, my son?" Samuel asked, his voice calm and steady. David hesitated for a moment before recounting his encounter with the shadowy creature in the forest. As he spoke, he noticed that his father's expression grew more serious. When David finished his story, Samuel let out a deep sigh. "You have encountered the invisible beasts," he said. "The elders have spoken of them for generations, but few have ever seen them. These creatures are not of this world. They are spirits, guardians of the forest. They are not to be trifled with, David." David listened to his father's words, but he could not shake the feeling that there was more to the story. "Father," he said, "I want to learn more about these creatures. I want to understand why they are here and what they want." Samuel shook his head. "It is dangerous, David. The invisible beasts are not like the animals you hunt. They are spirits, and they do not follow the same rules. You would be wise to leave them be." But David was not so easily dissuaded. He had always been curious, always eager to learn more about the world around him. "I understand the danger, Father," he said, "but I cannot ignore what I saw. I feel that I am meant to learn more about these creatures." Samuel looked into his son's eyes and saw the determination there. He knew that once David set his mind to something, there was no changing it. "Very well," he said, "but you must be careful. Speak to the elders. They know more about the invisible beasts than anyone else. And remember, David, that some things are not meant to be understood by men." David nodded, grateful for his father's advice. He knew that his journey was only just beginning and that there was much he had to learn. The next day, David sought out the village elders. The elders of Andara were respected for their wisdom and knowledge of the old ways. They were the keepers of the village's history, the ones who remembered the stories of the ancestors and the spirits of the land. David found the elders gathered under the large baobab tree at the center of the village, where they often met to discuss matters of importance. The oldest of the elders, a man named Elder Benjamin, looked up as David approached. "Young David," Elder Benjamin said, his voice deep and resonant, "what brings you to us today?" David bowed respectfully before the elders and told them of his encounter in the forest. As he spoke, the elders listened intently, their faces grave. When David finished, Elder Benjamin spoke. "You have seen what many in this village have only heard of, David. The invisible beasts are not of this world. They are spirits, protectors of the forest. They have been here for as long as anyone can remember, and they guard the secrets of the land." Another elder, Elder Grace, nodded in agreement. "These creatures are powerful, and they do not show themselves to just anyone. The fact that you saw one means that you have been chosen, David. But chosen for what, we do not yet know." David felt a chill run down his spine at Elder Grace's words. "What should I do, elders?" he asked. "I want to understand these creatures, to learn more about them." Elder Benjamin stroked his long white beard thoughtfully. "There is a legend," he said, "an old story passed down through the generations. It is said that the invisible beasts were once the guardians of a great treasure, a treasure hidden deep within the forest. But the treasure is not gold or jewels. It is the knowledge and wisdom of the ancestors. The beasts protect it, and only those who are pure of heart and have proven themselves worthy can find it." David listened intently. His curiosity piqued. "How can I prove myself worthy?" he asked. Elder Grace smiled gently. "That is for you to discover, young David. The path to the treasure is not an easy one, and it requires more than just bravery. You must be wise, patient, and true of heart. The invisible beasts will test you, and you must be prepared for whatever challenges they may present." David nodded, his resolve strengthened. "Thank you, elders. I will do whatever it takes to prove myself worthy." As David left the baobab tree, the elders watched him go, their expressions thoughtful. David knew that his journey into the heart of the forest would not be easy. He spent the next few days preparing for the trials that lay ahead. He sharpened his arrows, mended his clothes, and gathered enough food and water to last him several days. On the morning of his departure, Samuel came to see him off. "Remember, my son," Samuel said, "that courage alone will not be enough. You must use your mind and your heart. Trust in yourself, but also be humble. There is much you do not yet know." David nodded, grateful for his father's wisdom. "I will, Father. I will return with the knowledge I seek." With that, David set off into the forest, determined to find the treasure guarded by the invisible beasts. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and denser, their branches forming a thick canopy overhead. The air was cool and damp, and the forest floor was covered in a thick layer of leaves. David moved silently, his eyes and ears alert for any sign of danger. After several hours of walking, David came to a part of the forest that was different from the rest. The trees here were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The light was dim, and a strange, oppressive feeling hung in the air. David felt a shiver of unease as he stepped into the shadowy grove. He could sense that this was a place of great power, a place where the spirits of the forest were strong. As he moved deeper into the grove, he heard a faint rustling sound behind him. He turned quickly, his bow at the ready, but there was nothing there. The sound came again, this time from his left, and then from his right. It seemed to be coming from all around him. David's heart began to race as he realized that he was surrounded. He nocked an arrow and waited, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the grove, followed by a chorus of growls from all around him. David's breath caught in his throat as he realized that he was surrounded by the invisible beasts. The growls grew louder, and the shadows began to move, forming into the shapes of large, predatory animals. David could see their glowing eyes, but their bodies remained shrouded in darkness. David knew that he could not fight these creatures with his bow and arrow. He had to rely on his wits and his heart. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice steady. "I am not here to harm you," he said. "I seek the wisdom of the forest, and I wish to prove myself worthy. If you must test me, then I am ready." The growls ceased, and the shadows stopped moving. For a moment there was silence, and then a voice spoke from the darkness. "You are brave, young hunter," the voice said. "But bravery alone will not save you. You must prove that your heart is true." David's mind raced as he tried to think of how to prove his worthiness. He remembered the words of the elders and knew that he had to show humility and wisdom. "I know that I am not yet worthy," David said, "but I am willing to learn. I am willing to face whatever challenges you set before me. I ask only that you give me a chance to prove myself." There was another moment of silence, and then the voice spoke again.